So there are four things that I can think of that can make your photos blurry. And if you know how to work around these four things, then 99% of the time you will have sharp images, that's for sure. Also, there are bonus tips at the end of this video, so keep watching to find out what are those. So the first thing is shutter speed, and this is probably the most important setting on your camera that can prevent blurry photos. The two things that shutter speed can fix for you is one, motion blur from the subject. So anything that you are photographing, if that item is moving inside the frame, then you need a fast enough shutter speed to freeze the moment. Otherwise, you will have motion blur, which is basically making the subject look soft. The second thing that the shutter speed can fix is camera shake. Basically, the shakiness of your hand while trying to handhold the camera. This camera shake can be fixed by two things, but mostly from shutter speed. And the general rule for combating handshake softness in your images is to have a shutter speed at least double your focal length. It's pretty simple. If you have a full frame 50mm focal length, then you should use around 1/100th of a second. If you have a focal length of 35mm, then you should use 1/70th of a second. But this only applies in cases when you don't have image stabilization at all in your camera, so not in the lens, not in the body itself, because if you have those, you should use those, and those will help with camera shake a lot more than you would think. You could go down to even 1/15th of a second or 1/8th of a second for moving subjects when the issue is not your hands being shaky because you already have a fast enough shutter speed. You need to consider the type of subject that you are shooting. So for example, if you are shooting portraits and you have moving people in the frame, then you should use around 1/125 of a second or 1/200 of a second, something like that, to really eliminate the smaller movement of the person that you are shooting the portrait of. If you are shooting kids, then you need at least 1/250th of a second or even higher. If you are shooting cars, then depending on what type of motorsport or just cars in general on the street, you might need even faster than that, like 1/1000th of a second. And for birds in flight and stuff like that, you need more than 1/1000th of a second most of the time. So the second thing that can break your photos and make them blurry is the aperture. I'm not saying that you need to stop down all the time. It's just that you need to understand how aperture works, because then it will be easier to compensate for the shallow depth of field. So when you use the large aperture or the smaller number, 1.4 or 1.2, you will have a really small shallow depth of field. For example, when you are shooting a portrait and you try to focus on the eye, you might have only 1 centimeter of plane of focus that you can play with. What that means is that if the subject moves his or her head, or you move the camera more than that 1 centimeter forward or backward, then your focus is missed. And that will cause a blurry photo because the focus will be on another part of the subject, not where you wanted it to be. There are basically two things that you could do to eliminate this issue. One is obviously to stop down and make your focus plane a bit bigger, but then you lose the bokeh, which will not always align with what you want to achieve with that photo. So the second thing that you could do is basically put your camera in autofocus continuous and continuous low or high shooting speeds. Depending on your camera, you can use either one of them. This will allow you to shoot multiple frames in a short period of time with the continuous autofocus on. So even if you or your subject are moving back and forward, you will still have at least one image that will be shot exactly at the moment when the subject's eye or whatever you want to be in the plane of focus will be in the plane of focus. Also, don't forget that aperture is not everything. So you can have a really open aperture with ultra wide angle lens, and you will still have a decently wide plane of focus. So in those cases, you will not have this issue, or at least not that visible. But then if you use, for example, a 135 millimeter 1.8 or f2, then in that case, compared to the ultra wide 1.4, you have a smaller aperture, but because of the focal length, you have a lot shallower depth of field. So keep that in mind when you are thinking about the aperture and the plane of focus as well. Step number 3 that you could use to fix the blurry photo issue is to use the correct autofocus settings. If you are using the latest and greatest from Sony, Canon, or Nikon, like I really mean the latest and greatest, then you could probably just simply get by putting the camera into some sort of tracking autofocus with continuous autofocus turned on, and you can use any of the AI features, and you know that the camera will do almost a perfect job in keeping your subject as sharp as possible. But if you have an older camera or a Fujifilm camera nowadays, you might have smaller issues here and there, and in these cases you will need to experiment with your own camera to see what are the best settings for the camera to shoot in for having the best hit rate, because each camera will have different strengths and weaknesses. So for example, for Fujifilm, using the zone focusing with the autofocus continuous will result in better hit rate when you have moving subject in the frame. I don't like zone focusing, so I tried it out, and I decided that that's not for me, and I can live with what the tracking focus does on the X-T5. The camera is not really used for video, only for photography, and in these cases, tracking autofocus works great for me, and I'm using the continuous low shooting mode, so I'm always doing 2 or 3 images no matter what the situation is. And this is my solution for Fujifilm X-T5 for photography. But for your case scenario, this might be different. You might like zone focusing. Your camera might not have tracking, so you will need to use something else. But yeah, you will need to experiment to try and find the correct settings for your specific camera. And the fourth thing is to keep your camera steady. This goes back to the first step, basically, from the camera shake. But in the first step, we tackled shutter speed. You can eliminate camera shake by using a decently high enough shutter speed, or by using IBIS or stuff like that. But there are times when you really can't go more than a specific shutter speed because it's low light, or you really want to have motion blur, but besides the fact that your subject is moving and that is being blurred, you want the rest of the image to be tack sharp, and you don't have a tripod. Then what? Keep your camera steady. 2 things. You either put down the camera somewhere, obviously. So instead of a tripod, you use a rail or something that you can steady your camera with. The other thing is to use some interesting techniques. There are 2 that I can think of, from which one of them I use a decent amount of time. So let's start with the second one, because that's what I use and that's what I know. You grab your camera with both hands, one on the grip and one on the lens, or wherever you feel comfortable, but you need to have a good grip with both hands. And then you tuck your elbows near your body, and while you are staying like this, you breathe out. And while you are breathing out, almost at the end of your breath, then you take the shot. This way you can at least halfen or even do 25% of your normal shutter speed. The other thing that you can use if you are using a neck strap is to grab your camera and pull out your neck strap as much as possible, creating a tension in the neck strap. With this, you will have a much more stable camera, and you can shoot, again, probably a similar shutter speed like with the other elbow tucking technique. And then just as a small bonus here for the keeping the camera steady section is, even if you don't carry a big tripod with you, at least try to get hold of a mini tripod. So these were the 4 things that can help eliminate blurriness from your photos. And as I promised at the beginning, there are bonus tips that I can give you. Look for high ISO. High ISO in itself will not create blurry images. But if you leave the camera to choose a high enough ISO, the image will be mushy from the noise. The focus, the shutter speed, and everything else will be spot on, and the image itself is basically sharp. It's just the high noise level in the image will ruin everything, and that's something that you need to look out for. So try to keep your ISO below a certain level based on your camera. It can be 1600, 3200, 6400, 12800. You will need to figure out what is the level of noise that you are comfortable with and what is the level of noise that you still consider to make your image sharp enough. So let's recap. Which are the 4 things that will help eliminate blurry photos and create sharp images almost every time with any camera in any situation? 1 is to look for shutter speed. Use a fast enough shutter speed for the situation. The second thing is your aperture. Think about the aperture you use and how shallow of a depth of field it will create, and how easy it is for your camera or your subject to go out of that plane of focus. Third thing is to find the best autofocus settings of your camera. And then the fourth tip was to keep your camera steady. And the bonus tip, look out for high ISO settings, because high ISO will create much noise, and much noise will mean mushy images. Even though your image is sharp, you will not see. That's it. 4 easy tips that can help you raise the chances for getting TACK sharp images, no matter what camera you use and no matter what situation you find yourself in. If this video helped you, give it a like. And if you know any other tips that can help others create sharp images, leave a comment down below. And if you are into travel, photography, or you just want some simple tips to improve your skills, then consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. You know the jazz. Subscribe, comment, like, and see you in the next one.